Your reward for sticking around to the 4 p.m. research panel is you get a little sweet musical stylings from our DJ Groves over here. So, yeah. We figured, hey, what the hell, you know. Let me know when you're ready. So that's the sound of 1 million page views in a single day at the Christian Science Monitor. You can hear a little golf clap going on back there as they were celebrating that achievement. If that sounds a little bit familiar to some of you here, that you get extra points as a loyal ISOJ fan. Because 5 years ago, we stood in front of you on this very same stage and also played that sound. At the time, the Monitor was consistently getting between 30 and 40 million page views per month. This is the monthly page views of the Christian Science Monitor today. So you can see the change here over time, and you can see what their page views were back in 2009, when the Monitor became one of the first newspapers to really stop the presses. They didn't just talk about going digital first, they actually completely killed their daily print edition, although they did actually keep a print weekly. This is obviously a huge change in terms of metrics, right? It also represents a change in strategy, change in the way the Monitor thought about their goals and their work, a change in their routines, and the way that they did their jobs. And I mean, obviously in some ways, this is a story of failure, right? I mean, that's a huge drop in terms of page views, just to keep on the depression train here. But at the same time, as we've talked about a lot over the past couple of days, page views are certainly not the only or even the best metric with which to judge a news organization's success. Maybe a smaller, more loyal audience that is willing to subscribe is actually more valuable than that kind of drive-by traffic. And there's also a story to be told here of a willingness to change and evolve, although not certainly without resistance, and in some cases too fast, not necessarily giving enough time to a new initiative to allow it to really work. So what we're going to try to tell you about here is a little bit about what we've learned over time at the Christian Science Monitor in terms of what worked and didn't work in terms of their strategy and culture, with the hope that maybe that provides a little bit of insight for other news organizations also going through something similar. And we have been studying them for 9 years, so we do have a little bit of a longer perspective, I think, than most academic research is able to show. So a little bit of quick context here in case you have no idea what the Monitor is. They have always received a subsidy from the church, but they're not a religious publication. They're written for a broader audience, very well respected. They won a number of Pulitzer Prizes, particularly well known for their international coverage. The Monitor has a motto that was written by the founder, Mary Baker Eddy, to injure no man but bless all mankind. What they mean by that is essentially a very thoughtful, solutions-oriented, non-sensational form of journalism. And this was something the staff had really internalized. They actually repeated this to us regularly in interviews. So that really sort of leads the question, how do you evolve with that motto still intact? Or, even do you? And around 2008, 2009, the church announced that they were going to drastically cut back that subsidy. Now, we already know this is already a really shitty time for newspapers, right? There's a recession. Google and Facebook are increasingly gobbling up all of our ad dollars. So there was a mood kind of desperation and a lot of survival anxiety. And they decided, how are we going to deal with this? Well, we're going to really just try to grow our audience as much as possible, by any means necessary, if we can. This is just a little quick context about our methods, but you guys can read the paper if you want to know more. Basically, spent a whole bunch of time there. These are sort of our 4 kind of largest themes that we found over the 9 years, and I'm going to go through each of them fairly quickly. So the first theme is embracing experimentation and data-driven decision-making. Now, this did not happen easily, because change, this is a huge shocker to anyone in a newsroom, is really, really hard, right? And perhaps especially hard at the Monitor. They went very aggressively into broadcast in the 1990s to fairly spectacular failure. So you can imagine how some in the newsroom, when, oh, there's a new technology called the internet that we now have to embrace, there was perhaps even more skepticism than there was in other newsrooms that this was a good idea to work on. But, I mean, the church was essentially saying you have to make up for a $13 million cut in your subsidy. You're already down 20 staff members through layoffs. There may be more. So they were pretty motivated to try to do something. So how do you grow your audience? Well, today in 2018, a lot of this looks fairly familiar, but 5, 6 years ago, a lot of this was a little bit more cutting edge. You can see things like SEO, writing stories based on what's already trending on Google as a way to boost your traffic, quizzes that require lots of clicks. They also did a variety of other new products. And it was really successful. And this was actually pretty exciting for the newsroom. Even those that had been resistant for a while, I mean, it was working. They were in the conversation again, even if they were a little bit uncomfortable about how they had gotten there. These new sort of routines had taken hold. But unfortunately, not so fast. The party was over very quickly. They realized that ad revenue is not going to be enough, even with this much higher traffic, to make up for that lost subsidy. Google, Facebook changed their algorithm very quickly. That presents its own kinds of challenges. And that led the Monitor to really pivot to what is kind of our second theme, which is audience really does matter. And we've heard that also here today as well. The idea that we really need to engage and understand our readers more, but that's harder. It's more complex. It's more threatening to the journalist's ego and sense of authority. It's one thing to put a sexy headline on something. It's another thing to figure out how to really listen to and respect your audience. And even though journalists really do believe in our public service mission, part of that is still infused with the idea that we know what the news is. We're the gatekeeper. So the Monitor made, some inroads into this strategy of paying attention to their audience. When I started in newspapers, this was essentially how we viewed our audience. Very vague. I'm not even sure who this guy is exactly. But the Monitor decided to develop some personas. Greg and Miranda, this was essentially who they felt their target audience was. And by doing this, they were able to better kind of identify some types of information needs, gaps, how they could serve a more specific group of people. So in some ways, that was valuable. But again, this was difficult. The Monitor killed comments. Very few on the staff were really using social media in any kind of meaningful way, especially not to engage. They weren't doing a lot of crowdsourcing or allowing their audience to participate in any way. So they made some inroads here, but maybe not as much as they might have hoped. So that leads us to our third big theme, the breakdown of the traditional wall between business and editorial. Now, we're not talking here about allowing businesses to buy favorable coverage or anything that's like hugely unethical like that, but we're talking about increased communication and information sharing, which once would have been a big no-no. This began with John Yema, who was the editor when they killed the daily print edition. He worked very regularly with the publisher at the time. Over the years that we've studied at the Monitor, a number of editorial staff have moved to the business side. They sit in closer proximity in the building so that it's easier to kind of talk to each other and share information. And in some ways, that's a story of success. The Monitor was able to identify some potential good market segments that might be interested in new verticals. Passcode was a cybersecurity vertical. They took a page from Texas Tribune, multiple revenue streams, events, etc. They started the Monitor Global Outlook, which was essentially a business intelligence publication. These started off pretty successfully. It was kind of exciting. They were growing revenue. They were still kind of young. They had a dedicated dedicated audience that was going up. But the Monitor actually decided to kill both of these publications because they felt like, you know what, this is still too far away from our real core mission. So that's kind of the fourth theme here, the changing identity and concepts of unique value at the Monitor. It was founded in response to yellow journalism, right? That was the fundamental ethos of Solutions from the beginning. Tried to chase that big audience, it didn't work, went back to the original mission, decided if we have to be a lot smaller, so be it. If nothing else, the church board that oversees the Monitor felt like at least we could serve people of the faith, which made even some of the Christian Scientists on the staff a little bit uncomfortable because it was so different than what they'd done before. They started out with creating a new unique value proposition. They were trying to differentiate a little bit more from everything else out there. Then they refined that a little bit to what they called UMP. They were constantly asking whether or not any given story that they had assigned or were doing constituted UMP. And that's a little bit infused with Christian Science values. So in some ways, this is a good story because they are differentiating themselves a little bit. It makes sense to have a clear goal, to know who you are, and to really kind of have that as a measurement that you can hold yourself against. But in the bad part, in some ways, this is really a reassertion of that gatekeeper role, reassertion of control, right? We know what kind of journalism you need, and we're going to give it to you, right? So a little bit different than what they had hoped for earlier. So this is really one of the Monitor's biggest products right now. It's the Monitor Daily, a newspaper. They have about 8,000 subscribers paying $11 a month. They want to grow that to about 30,000. So it's much, much smaller, and so is their staff. Another round of buyouts and layoffs. The Monitor is now at 40 people in the newsroom. But they do feel as though they are really fulfilling what they set out to do. So again, a constant story of success and of failure, and also one of constant change. It's never gonna stop, guys. Like, you're never gonna hit the point at which you don't have to innovate anymore, you don't have to change. And that's maybe one thing we found. So these are a few takeaways, and if you wanna talk to us more, here you go.